Hello, welcome to this seminar on logical framework analysis. My name is Matt Colwell. For those of you who do not know me personally, I'd like to introduce myself by saying that my wife, Maureen, my children and I have just celebrated 30 years working with YWAM, mostly in Australia but a bit in Asia. At this time, I'm a board member of Australian Mercy, a board member of YWAM Tasmania, a member of YWAM Medical Ships Australia, and a member of YWAM Australia's National Executive. I've been involved with the planning and administration of community development programs for a number of years. My work in this area started, I think, in 1973 when I was working with the Australian Government, first the Department of Immigration and then the Department of Social Security. And it's continued over the years with various projects in YWAM and in Australian Mercy. In this video, I want to share the key concepts of a community development tool known as logical framework analysis, or more simply, Logframe. It's a tool for summarising the main design components of a community development project, its goals, its performance indicators, how its performance is verified, the assumptions being made in the project. You've heard of the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. I prefer though to run with something that Albert Einstein said, keep it simple but not too simple. I would like you to understand the Logframe tool so that at the end of this video you are able to work with it. I would like to start with a brief history lesson as a simple way to explain the basic principles of the Logframe tool. For this summary, I'm indebted to Eugene Bramer Mahaley's work, Foreign Aid and Politics in Nepal. Now, we have much to thank the US for. In its foreign aid programs, however, the US has made some mistakes. But it's largely out of some of those mistakes that we now have the Logframe. And I do want to thank the US and its people. So here we go. After World War II, the US and other major powers at that time had ambitions for Asia and Africa which could not be served by traditional diplomatic methods. They wanted to shape the social, political and economic character of smaller countries. In Nepal, US foreign aid was based on this rationale or logic. Using advisors and various programs, they would create a sound agricultural base. That sound agricultural base would undergird and strengthen the whole economy of the country. The sound economy would then lead to political stability, which in turn would keep communism out of Nepal. There is a hierarchy between these different elements. If one, then the next. And all the way through this logic, there are assumptions being made. In this particular case, there were some very big assumptions made, unwittingly for the most part, and they did not hold true. Anyway, in 1952, they started 3 projects, each badly conceived and badly implemented. There was a village development program. Trained agricultural advisors would deliver a range of government services to the people of rural Nepal. And there would be a channel then for the people to pass judgments on problems and bring solutions back to the central government. This project was a complete failure though. Rural youth of Nepal did not enter the program. Most of the agricultural advisors were city-born and bred. The villagers of Nepal were not receptive to change. Landlords had vested interests in the existing land tenure and ownership system. There was widespread fatalism in Nepali society. There was also an anti-malaria campaign 2 technicians would spend 2 years spraying every house in a particular area with DDT. A program almost guaranteed to bring quick success. But it too failed. There was inadequate spraying. It created expectations among the people that could not be fulfilled. And not one Nepali was trained. There was a seed testing project, a scientific program of testing seeds and of training Nepalis. But again, this too failed. Very poor record keeping, the results were invalidated, and there was no one at all trained. So the 3 projects failed, for reasons related to each project, and also for an overriding reason outside the projects. The Nepali civil service was not interested in what happened outside Kathmandu. They were completely obsessed with political struggles. In short, too much was attempted too quickly, with too many assumptions about Nepali society, with too little money and too few staff. The failures damaged US prestige. US advice was simply not wanted. For the Nepalis, the whole US experiment was a political liability, and the government was blamed. US foreign aid in these initial years accomplished nothing of value, and in losing credibility, they made further assistance to Nepal even more difficult. Now, at the same time, the Indian government embarked upon a couple of projects. A road was built from northern India to Kathmandu, ostensibly to facilitate trade. But on its completion, the Nepalis saw it as little more than a highway for the Indian military to enter right into the heart of Kathmandu. The Indians built the first airport outside Kathmandu, so short and it couldn't be extended that only small planes from India could land. And again, the Nepalis were far from happy with the outcome. In themselves, these projects were successful, but they had no long-term impact, and Nepali resentment towards India continued to grow. So to improve its image in Nepal, India then donated beds and equipment for a 500-bed hospital. But by 1958, every single item had completely disappeared. India also granted Nepal $1.2 million for water projects to be directed by the Nepalis. The projects, though, were never even started, and the money disappeared. Until 1956, Nepal had enjoyed a measure of political stability. But with a very politicised civil service, the country entered a period of marked instability when King Tribhuvan died. His son Mahendra became the new king, but virtually the whole civil service was swept aside and a new one installed. In particular, the new king appointed a new prime minister who was very pro-Chinese. He then immediately negotiated an agreement to transfer the sovereignty of Tibet from Kathmandu to Peking in exchange for $12.6 million. No strings attached. This gave the Nepali government a certain financial stability, but the growing influence that China was able to wield was a cause of major consternation and confusion for the US officials. That pro-Chinese Prime Minister and the civil service he'd appointed was forced to resign, however, after only 18 months. The next Prime Minister, he wouldn't cooperate with the king, and he was dismissed after 4 months. Again, the civil service was purged. For quite some time, the Nepali government and the US delegation were now lobbying Washington for an invitation for the king to visit the US. But the approaches were consistently refused. Then, in 1958, King Mahendra turned to Russia, visited Moscow, and came home with foreign aid. Again, the US was at a complete loss. In desperation, though, they then invited the king to Washington. But instead of being received with joy, the invitation was greeted with derision. The Nepalis saw themselves simply as being played. By 1960, the Chinese money was running out. The Nepalis asked the US for $15 million. The US delegation felt that the Nepalis, though, couldn't handle so much. And so they recommended only $7.5 million. But the king was indeed now about to visit Washington. The State Department felt it could agree not only to the $7.5 million, but as a gesture of goodwill to an additional $2.5 million. But in his meeting with President Eisenhower, the king was granted the full $15 million he wanted, on the basis that it would ensure political stability in Nepal. A mad rush ensued in Kathmandu to get projects up and running. Money was thrown at anything. 93 projects were initiated in very quick order. On presentation of the bill for the $15 million, though, the State Department refused to honour it. They felt that the grant was supposed to be spent over 2 years, not just one. And at this news, the Nepalis went into uproar. Again, the primary impact of US foreign aid was disappointment, confusion, and even anger. To confound matters even further, only 4 months later, another political coup removed the very government that the grant was supposed to keep in office. The $15 million did not accomplish its purpose. 1961 and 1962 then were 2 years of major rethinking of US aid to Nepal. They concluded that the major problems were not the backwardness and the conservatism of the Nepali people, nor was it the over-politicised and even incompetent civil administration, nor was it corruption, nor was it the land tenure system. The major problems were assumptions that the US officials themselves made. In the project, they assumed that the Nepali people were ready for economic, social and political change. They assumed that agricultural advisors would be accepted in the countryside. They assumed that the Nepali government and civil service could manage the plant development. They assumed that simple training of Nepalis would overcome any perceived defects. They assumed that other countries, India, China, Russia, would not get involved in Nepali development. They assumed that the US foreign aid would be welcomed and that political stability would follow automatically. But the biggest mistake the US officials made was to assume that these factors would not mitigate or diminish the impact of the project. Now, one of the bigger outcomes of that re-evaluation of US foreign aid in Nepal has been the development of the Logframe. And so I now want to turn to that explicitly. In any chain of events, there are a number of cause-effect couplets. If you do this, then you'll get a certain outcome. If this happens, then that will follow, and so on. You can depict it like this. There is a certain logical connection between one and the next. At the beginning of the cause-effect sequence, the elements are very detailed. At the top end, they are very broad. A community development project now can usually be summarised in 4 of these logical elements. And we need to choose those 4 which will be most meaningful to project donors and to project managers. The 4 elements will describe what the project will actually do, the immediate outputs flowing from what the project does, the strategic outcomes these outputs will accomplish, and then the goals that will be achieved through these strategic outcomes. As an aside, just let me say that there is indeed some confusion in the Logframe literature and in project proposal templates too about the use and exact meaning of various terms, particularly the terms goal and purpose. I suggest that we really understand the Logframe itself, and then we will understand whatever words are used in a particular proposal template. These 4 elements, we may loosely call them a project's objectives, are described in the left-hand column of the Logframe. An example will probably help us, so let's start to develop a sample Logframe. For our purposes, let's imagine we've done some research and found that the standard of living in a particular community is really held back by mother-child, or by the absence of mother-child health and dental services. We just happen to have a midwife and a dentist in our team, so we decide to move on it. The first things we will do are to secure a suitable site, to contract a builder, and to decide upon a design for the clinic. And at the same time, we will start some health promotion work. Got the picture? These are the things we will do, and they are summarised in the activities box. Now in time, perhaps 3 months, assuming all goes well, we will have a clinic. Hopefully the people will be breaking the door down for our services, and our midwife and our dentist are ready to start work. These things are our immediate outputs, and they will be summarised here. Again, assuming all goes well and that we can continue to serve this community, we will be providing full mother-child health and dental services, and the health of the community in these areas will be improving. And finally, as the health of the community improves in these areas, we anticipate that the standard of general health will also improve. What we have just summarised is the project rationale, the logic of what we are doing and how we will achieve our project objectives. The second column of our Logframe asks us to determine how we will measure success. What is the measuring stick that we will use? Well, let's think of our project again. And let's start with the outputs. We can measure these fairly easily. Do we actually have a building? How many patients do we hope to see each week? They are measures of how well the project is doing, of how many runs it's putting on the board. How well those runs actually translate into improved health is another question. To measure improved health then, we will use the rate for infant mortality, the rate of oral cavities, or other such measures. To measure improvements in the people's standard of health, we can use a range of statistics, their income level, etc. But it's important to note right now that at this level we are really trying to measure what impact the project has on the community. So rather than something being monitored in an ongoing way, it is an end-of-project evaluation question. The evaluation of a project is really a matter for separate study in its own right. But here, in the very design of the project, we are already starting to think about how the project will be evaluated at its conclusion. But let us now come down to the bottom box. How do we measure success at the activity level? Our measures here actually relate to whether we have all the inputs we need to get the project started. For example, the land required, the building materials, government approval, publicity brochures, consultation and appropriate input from other organisations, all the finances necessary. And so here we simply list the project inputs. The third column of our log frame is relatively simple, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. The means of verification summarises exactly who will provide the evidence required by our performance indicators, or exactly how we will get it. For example, photos will prove whether the building is completed. An on-site visit will observe the clinic in operation. The project manager will provide quarterly monitoring statistics. In this way, the log frame tells us who is responsible for what parts of the project and how the project as a whole will provide accountability. Turning now then to our assumptions column in the log frame, we need to think carefully here. Assumptions are something we make all the time. It is safe to travel on this train. Eating this meal will satisfy my hunger. The sun will rise tomorrow morning. We are not talking about those types of assumptions here. Rather, we are talking about factors which are already operating in the community and which may impact the project negatively. In our total design of the project, we assume these factors will not affect the project, but this column asks us to spell out what those assumptions are. In our case, village leaders will approve the site. The required materials can be obtained. The village shamans will cease objecting. Villagers will see the benefits of the project. Now, if there's a high probability of an assumption not holding true, that is, if what we fear may well come upon us, then we clearly have to make some contingency plans. For example, we've assumed the required materials can be obtained. That tells the potential donor that there's a possibility we cannot get the materials we need for the building. We hope we can, and we are working hard to obtain them. If we can't get them, we will possibly have to redesign the building to use the materials we can get. And that will have impacts on our budget, project timing, etc. Stating our assumptions thus points us to a number of implications we should be watching. Or again, the village shamans are already objecting. We assume the project will not be affected by that, but we are watching the situation and may have to open discussions with them. Similarly, at the output level, we assume that we will have a steady supply of medical consumables. We spell that out here precisely because there is a question mark over it. It's an area we will have to work on. In this way, the assumptions column highlights the risks that the project faces, the very meaningful but perhaps intangible factors that the project managers need to address. But there are factors too outside the manager's control which may affect the project as a whole. Things like a cholera outbreak or social unrest, even war. If such events are on the radar, they should be mentioned in the log frame. This assumptions column gives potential donors a clear idea of what the project is up against, of what are the risks to their investment, Not only do they need that information up front, but also you need to give it up front. It is not a good look in the project evaluation to claim that the project has failed, but it is a particularly bad look to claim that the project has failed because of something you had overlooked. So this is the log frame. I emphasise again that like a financial budget, it is a tool to help project stakeholders understand the logic of the whole project. It cannot be developed as an afterthought. It cannot be put in a filing cabinet and forgotten. The log frame summarises the project objectives and the rationale of how the project will accomplish the ultimate goal or goals. And it relates very closely to your project proposal. When a project proposal template asks for information on your project design, on your goals, strategic purposes, on your outputs, on your activities, it is asking for a full statement on what we have summarised in the objectives column of our log frame. When it asks about monitoring and reporting, it is asking for a full statement on what we have summarised in the performance indicators and verification columns. When it asks questions about the project's sustainability and questions about its evaluation, it is asking for a full statement on the project's assumptions. I hope it is clear too how the log frame is likewise closely related to the way in which the project is monitored. It gives us the basic measures to be used in 6-monthly or annual reports, and it shows the donor too what he can expect to see in those reports. And then in highlighting our assumptions, the log frame points towards the final end of project evaluation. But as I said above, that's really a separate subject. Finally, the log frame is a tool which summarises the project, ideally in 1 or 2 pages. The idea is that donors and other stakeholders will obtain an overview of all the essentials of the project very quickly. In very big projects, we may be tempted to develop a log frame for each aspect of the project, ending up with a 10 or even 20-page log frame. I feel that this would defeat the purpose of the log frame, and therefore I'd encourage you, even in very big projects, to keep the log frame concise. 2, maximum of 3 pages. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this little study. There are other resources you may find helpful on this website. And if you feel the need for further help, or if you've got questions, or got suggestions for how to improve this study, here is my email address, mcolwell@trump.net.au. Thank you, have a good day, and may God bless you.